There is a dangerous misunderstanding about people who feel deeply, and it has been costing them everything. The world looks at someone who keeps forgiving, keeps understanding, keeps showing up with patience and compassion, and the specific, generous willingness to see the wound beneath the behavior, and it calls that weakness. It mistakes the quiet endurance of someone carrying enormous pain without complaint for the passivity of someone who has nothing worth protecting. That misreading is one of the most costly errors a person can make about another human being. Because the person who feels everything, who absorbs the room's tension before a word is spoken, who forgives the lie because they see the insecurity driving it, who stays patient with behavior that would make others walk away immediately, is not weak. They are doing something that requires extraordinary interior strength. They are holding space for the full complexity of human imperfection while simultaneously carrying our own weight and everyone else's. But here is what nobody says clearly enough about deeply feeling people. There is a line, invisible to most people observing from the outside, often invisible even to the person themselves until it has already been crossed. A specific internal threshold beyond which something changes not gradually, not negotiably, but permanently. And the most frightening thing about that threshold is not what happens when the deeply feeling person finally gets angry. It is what happens when they finally go quiet, because the silence that follows is not absence. It is the specific, devastating sound of someone who finally stopped fighting for something they had already lost. And once that silence arrives, the dynamic that produced it is already over. To understand what happens when a deeply feeling person finally reaches their limit, you have to understand something specific about how they process the behavior of the people around them. They do not see behavior in isolation. They see the interior that produced it. When someone lies, they see the fear beneath the lie. When someone withdraws, they recognize the wound that withdrawal is protecting. When someone lashes out, they feel the pain that aggression is trying to discharge. This depth of perception, this involuntary, continuous, genuinely extraordinary capacity for seeing beneath surfaces is what makes them exceptional at compassion and exceptionally vulnerable to exploitation. Because they keep extending understanding to behavior that most people would reject after the first occurrence. They forgive the betrayal because they believe the person capable of better. They absorb the disrespect because they value the relationship over the conflict. They give the third chance and the fourth and the fifth because their perception genuinely shows them the potential in the person they could be, if the wound healed, if the pattern broke, if the investment of continued patience finally. Why produce the transformation it has been building toward? But here is the specific physiological reality of what this sustained forgiveness costs. Every disappointment leaves a mark in the nervous system, not metaphorically, literally. The nervous system registers broken trust as a threat, and a system that is repeatedly exposed to the same threat, through the same person, in the same dynamic, eventually does what all biological systems do when a threat cannot be removed. It adapts, it restructures, it builds specific, permanent changes to its processing of that threat source. The warmth that once arose automatically in this person's presence begins requiring effort. The benefit of the doubt that was once the default requires a conscious override of the pattern recognition that has been accumulating evidence. The hope that kept the deeply feeling person invested begins exhausting itself against the wall of consistent contrary evidence, until one day, not dramatically, not with warning, the emotional investment simply stops renewing itself, not because the deeply feeling person gave up, because their nervous system finally, accurately, processed the full weight of what the evidence had been saying all along. The relationship ended emotionally long before it ended in any visible sense, and the deeply feeling person was the only one who experienced the ending privately, silently, completely alone. Most people assume the breaking point for a deeply feeling person is a dramatic moment, a final confrontation, a specific act of betrayal so severe it cannot be explained away. Something visible and nameable that even the person who crossed the line would recognize as having crossed it. That is almost never how it actually works. The real breaking point is quieter than that, more interior, and in many ways more devastating because it arrives not through the accumulation of dramatic incidents, but through the accumulation of a specific, persistent, finally undeniable regarding realization. The realization that their heart has been taken for granted, that their loyalty has been treated as an unconditional resource rather than a gift that could be withdrawn, that their compassion, the specific extraordinary quality of their genuine care, has been operating not as the foundation of a mutual relationship, but as a tool the other person has been using, consciously or not, to maintain access without accountability. Nothing destroys a deeply feeling person faster than feeling emotionally invisible while giving everything they have. Because they do not give casually. They give entirely. They invest mentally, emotionally, spiritually. They notice the details, remember the conversations, track the moods, carry the weight of the other person's interior without being asked, and often without being acknowledged. And when that level of care is consistently ignored or used against them, something cracks. The breaking point does not always look like breaking. Sometimes it looks terrifyingly calm. The deeply feeling person simply stops reacting to the provocations, stops explaining their intentions to people who have demonstrated they will misread them regardless, stops checking on people who never checked on them, stops reopening doors for people who kept slamming them, and that stopping, that specific, eerie calm of someone who has completed their internal departure before making it external confuses people who are used to the deeply feeling person's continuous engagement. They do not understand what they are witnessing. They call it coldness. They call it drama. They call it the deeply feeling person changing for the worse. What they are actually witnessing is survival. The deeply feeling person has not become cold. They have become finished. And finished, unlike angry, unlike hurt, unlike disappointed, is genuinely irreversible. Here is what most people miss about what happens to a deeply feeling person on the other side of their breaking point. They do not become a diminished version of themselves. They do not close off and become inaccessible to genuine connection or lose the depth of perception that has always been their most essential characteristic. They do not trade their capacity for feeling for the protective numbness of someone who decided feeling was too costly. They become more themselves, not less. What falls away in the breaking point is not the sensitivity. It is the specific, wound-based misapplication of that sensitivity, the part that was compelling them to extend understanding and patience to dynamics and people that were not deserving of it, at the ongoing cost of their own interior life. Their standards transform, not because they become harder or less compassionate, because genuine emotional intelligence eventually produces a recognition that cannot be unlearned. Love without mutual respect is not love. Loyalty that requires self-betrayal is not loyalty. The suffering that was being called commitment was not commitment. It was the specific, sustained, entirely unnecessary cost of someone who had not yet understood that their extraordinary capacity for caring was not an obligation to care for everyone who presented a need. Once that understanding arrives, something shifts permanently in how they move through the world. They stop chasing connection at the cost of self-respect. They stop making themselves smaller to fit into spaces that were never built to hold their actual dimensions. They stop apologizing for the depth of their feeling to people who found that depth inconvenient. They stop explaining basic human decency to people who had demonstrated their unwillingness to practice it. And they begin slowly, imperfectly, with the specific difficulty of someone learning to inhabit themselves for the first time to protect their energy with the same thoroughness they once directed outward. This transformation shocks the people around them, because those people had organized their understanding of the deeply feeling person around the version that had no limits. The version that tolerated emotional neglect without visible consequence. The version that kept the door open regardless of what came through it. Boundaries always disturb the people who benefited from their absence. The manipulation stops working. The guilt stops working. The patterns that once reliably produced the deeply feeling person's re-engagement stop producing anything at all. Because the person who understood those patterns from the inside has finally seen them clearly from the outside. Here is the truth that everything in this script has been building toward, and it requires receiving both halves of it to be genuinely useful. If you are the deeply feeling person reading this, the one who recognized themselves in the breaking point, in the silent departure, in the exhaustion of carrying everyone else's weight while your own interior collapsed, without anyone noticing this is what you need to hear. Your breaking point was not a failure. It was not evidence of insufficient compassion or inadequate patience or the specific spiritual failing of someone who could not love generously enough. It was your nervous system finally, accurately, completely processing what your extraordinary perception had been trying to show you for years. The patterns you finally saw clearly were real. The imbalance you finally named was real. The cost that finally became unsustainable was real. And the departure, the specific, quiet, entirely private departure that happened in your interior long before any external action was not cruelty. It was the most self-respecting thing you have ever done. Now, here is the part that requires your honest attention. The same perception that finally showed you the pattern in that relationship, that same extraordinary capacity for seeing beneath surfaces, for recognizing what is actually happening beneath what is being presented, is the instrument you need to tee. You are an inward now, not as self-criticism, as genuine self-examination. Where are you still giving to dynamics that do not merit it? Where is the door still slightly open to a relationship whose pattern you have already accurately assessed? Where is the compassion still being extended, not from genuine abundance, but from the old compulsion, the wound-based belief that your worth is located in your usefulness? Your energy is not an infinite resource. Your genuine, extraordinary, irreplaceable capacity for deep feeling is not something that renews itself automatically regardless of where it is directed. It requires protection, discernment, the specific, ongoing, daily practice of directing it toward what genuinely deserves it, toward the relationships and the work and the interior life that can receive what you carry without consuming it. Here is your challenge, starting today. For the next week, 7 specific days practice noticing, before you give, whether you are giving from genuine abundance or from the compulsion that says your caring has to be proven through continuous availability. Notice the difference in how each feels in your body. The giving from abundance has a specific, open, unforced quality. The giving from compulsion has a specific, tight, vaguely resentful quality, the subtle body signal of someone who is extending beyond their actual capacity because the alternative feels too threatening. Trust the body signal. It has been accurate far longer than you have been listening to it. Here is the final truth that your soul has been waiting for someone to deliver without the softening that most healing content applies to make it more comfortable. You were never meant to be a resource. You were never meant to make yourself continuously available to every person who recognized your depth and wanted access to it. You were never meant to prove your value through the sustained endurance of relationships that were consuming you. You were meant to love with the full, extraordinary, genuinely rare quality of your capacity from a foundation that includes yourself, from an abundance that you protect as carefully as you extend, from the specific, grounded, unapologetic understanding that the people who deserve your depth are not the ones who require its exhaustion as evidence of its sincerity. The people who deserve your depth are the ones whose presence restores it. Find them. Protect what you carry until you do. Your extraordinary capacity for genuine feeling is not a wound to be managed. It is the most valuable thing you possess. Treat it accordingly, starting now, without apology. Asterisk without one more moment of giving what you cannot afford to lose to people who are never equipped to receive it. You know who you are. Now finally completely act like it.